Welcome to Resilience Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Ostrolenk. This show is about building better humans, institutions, and systems. On the show, I'll be interviewing many different experts from across many different fields, including human optimization, health and fitness, team building, mind-body medicine. In the institutional space, we're looking at different institutions and how we can create new ones, new models and maps, including in medicine, in education, in intelligence community, in law enforcement, in the military, especially in the special operations community. Thanks for being here and enjoy the show. So over the years, almost 30 years of doing this as a marriage and family therapist, psychotherapist, and coach now, I've had clients with a wide variety of issues that they've come to me, including some anxiety. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the ways that I think about anxiety and how one can consider working with it. Of course, I always encourage a client to go get a medical checkup, talk to their doctor to make sure there's no medical condition that either is causing or contributing to the anxiety. Put that aside, let's just assume for the moment that it's more situational, not built into the nervous system itself. It's a whole other conversation. But there's a few different things to consider. First, a question I asked a client who was sharing with me that they have anxiety, situational, not clinical, is that how do they know they're anxious? They'll say, well, I'm anxious. I said, great. How do you know you're actually anxious? Like, what's happening inside your physical system that would indicate to you have anxiety? And it's really interesting because a lot of people don't really ask themselves that question. They just have a concept called anxiety. But once they sit with how it shows up inside their system, then they can share with me. For instance, they might notice like heart palpitations, heartbeats a little bit faster than normal. Cool. There might be a breathing pattern connected to what they were calling anxiety. There might be things happening in the GI tract, which indicates to them that they're anxious. There might be things in other parts of their body. So the ideal is like, how do you do anxiety? Are there particular thought patterns that are connected to what you're calling anxiety? Are there particular imagery, smells, sounds, colors, things along those lines? So once a client knows the totality of how they do anxiety, that gives me insight to teach them how to engage their anxiety in different ways. So the first step when I'm working with anxiety is how do I help them in the short run change their state so they're no longer or less than anxious than they have been? And there's many different things you can do. For instance, if they notice that their breathing pattern is constricted, like they're holding their breath or they're not breathing fully, like deep abdominal breath, cool, that's easily shifted. I will teach them how to do deep abdominal breathing. Most of the time I have just a 5-count inhale, no hold, 5-count exhale, no hold. Doing that for 2 minutes to a person, they will notice that their anxiety diminishes. Maybe it doesn't go away, but it's a lot less. And what's great when the anxiety is a lot less and they're breathing more fully is they have access to the prefrontal cortex more than they would under an anxious conditions, which means they can think more clearly and take better decisions, which is a great first step. Now, if they're also notice other things happening in their body, those are also ways in. Let's just think about the mind. If there's a particular conversation that they know is happening inside their own consciousness related to the anxiety, contributing, causing the anxiety, or at least an expression of the anxiety, that can also be looked into and changed, just like the breathing pattern. So maybe there's a mantra or a phrase that they can say to themselves while they're changing their breathing pattern that allows them to shift out of whatever the conversation is that's negative, that's causing anxiety or contributing to anxiety, to something more positive and life-affirming and calming. So you can work on the mantra or a phrase or however you want to say it. You can work on the breath. Work on the breath is really important too, because what I find is a lot of clients, because of how they've learned to breathe under stressful conditions, and for a lot of people, stressful conditions is chronic over their lifetime, is they're very shallow breathers. And there's a contraction in their chest, shoulder area, in their chest, in the abdomen. So it's not just enough to say, hey, look, breathe deep abdominally. You actually have to open up the fascia and the muscles to allow the full breath to come in, and the full breath to come out. So you can also work muscularly and fascia at the fascia level, not just conceptually, I need to expand myself so I can breathe more fully. You actually have to expand yourself to breathe more fully. So there's ways of working with the muscle, there's in the fascia, there's ways of working with the lungs themselves, there are ways of working with the mind. All those ways in can be helpful in the short run to change the state. But it's also important too to think about if there's an external environmental cause, a person or a situation, cause in quotes, or a contributing factor to the anxiety. Let's look at that. So you do the immediate state change, so you're more calm, cool, and collected, at least a little bit more. More access to the prefrontal cortex, you think more clearly and act more effectively. But you also want to look at the situation that might be causing, in quotes, the anxiety. Is a situation you can do one or two things with. Can you modify and change the situation? Can you engage it differently? Great, that's a really important conversation to have, because if you can, then that can reduce the anxiety. If you can't change the situation, it's out of your power, okay, sometimes that happens. What you can do is change your reaction to the situation by becoming a response to the situation. Anxiety, for the most part, in this case, would be a reaction built into the nervous system to a perceived or real threat. But if you can change your mindset, so it's not just about a mantra for the short term, changing your state, but literally do a deep dive into how you think about the situation and shift it from, for instance, this is a threat. And if it is a real threat, don't change that. Like, deal with it as a real threat. But most of these things are not like tigers and bears and such. Oh my. These are a lot of the times things that we make up in our mind's eye. Not always, but a lot of the time. So if you can change your thinking around it for the longer term and look at it not as a real perceived threat, but an opportunity, perhaps a challenge, an adventure, smile at adversity, like, hey, I'm going to take this on with a smile. Literally, that mindset shifts your energetic pattern, shifts how you relate to the situation. And if it's a contributing factor to your anxiety, the anxiety will most likely either diminish or go away, because it's no longer triggering that part of you that feels like, oh my God, this is a threat. It's more like triggering that part of you that says, here's a challenge, and I'm taking this motherfucker on. So those are a few small things one can do when dealing with anxiety. There are many others, which I will get into at a later date, but just consider those two things. Changing your state immediately through breath, posture, muscle, fascia, mindset, and as well, change your whole mindset to the situation or the person at hand. If you like that tip, let me know, and let me know what stood out for you the most. What was the most valuable lesson you learned in this? If you have any other thoughts, like you're like, hey, I'd love to learn more about how you might recommend someone deal with anxiety outside of those two approaches, let me know that too. I can always do some more videos on anxiety and any other human condition that is of interest to you to learn more about, at least from my perspective. Stay resilient, and I'm out.